Hello and welcome to today's episode of Essential Friends. In this series, we'll be looking at some Christians from the past to help us to grow in faith. My name is Israel, and I'm here with Paul van Engelenhoven. Did I say it right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
So today we continue to look at Luther's preface to the book of Romans, right? So last time we looked at law and sin. Could you please recap for us how Luther explained these words?
Sure. So Luther was basically laying out that the law is not just like the law in this world, that it's external. You know, remember we talked about the police officer at the traffic light.
Oh, yeah.
It's not something external, but it's something of the heart. God looks at the heart. And so sin is not just what we do externally, what we speak, or what we where we go, or what we touch with our hands, but it's also in the heart. It's our motivations and intentions. So Luther says the reason why everyone is a sinner through and through is because sin is tested at the heart.
Okay, good. So today we take a look at grace and faith. So how does Luther explain or define the word grace?
Yeah, let me read to you the quote that we have here. But grace does do this much, that we are accounted completely just before God. God's grace is not divided into bits and pieces as are the gifts, but grace takes us completely into God's favor for the sake of Christ, our intercessor and mediator, so that the gifts may begin their work in us. So Luther is making a distinction between grace and gifts, right? He's saying grace is the whole package, and gifts are separated, divided over time, can be more or less. And so the grace of God comes as God's favor at once, completely and entirely, right? So if you believe in Jesus Christ, the grace of God, God's favor towards you is there completely, entirely, and totally at once. So it doesn't diminish, it doesn't decrease, and it doesn't increase, right? It's not different from one to the next. We are in the favor of God as much as any other believer, right? The grace of God towards Paul in his forgiveness and his acceptance before God was the same grace that we receive today. The gifts, on the other hand, can differ, right? God gifts some person more gifts than others in the sense that they're more gifted in doing spiritual things. They might have greater growth in their spiritual life. They might know more or advance more in different parts. But the favor, the love of God towards us is the same.
So what is faith according to Luther?
Yeah, so this is where Luther, I think, becomes really clear. So when I talk about Martin Luther's preface to Romans, I always talk about read the whole part, but focus on the word faith, right? Because he begins to explain, this is typical Luther, right? Faith is not that human illusion or dream that some people think it is, right? Luther always pokes, right? He's always clear. He's getting your attention. When they hear and talk a lot about faith and yet see no moral improvement or no good works as a result from it, they fall into error and say faith is not enough. You must do works if you want to be virtuous and get to heaven. So in other words, people say, I believe in God, doesn't change me. Okay, it's not working. Let me add some good works to it just to make sure that my faith looks good. And what Luther is saying, he's saying the problem is not faith in a biblical sense, it's their faith. What they call faith is not really faith. And then he explains what faith is. He says, faith is a work of God in us, which changes us and brings us to birth anew from God. It kills the old Adam, makes us completely different people in heart, mind, senses, and all our powers, and brings with it the Holy Spirit, brings the Holy Spirit with it. Then he goes on, what a living, creative, active, powerful thing is faith. It's impossible that faith ever stop doing good. Faith doesn't ask whether good works are to be done, but before it is asked, it has done them. It is always active. Whoever doesn't do such works is without faith. He gropes and searches about him for faith and good works, but doesn't know what faith or good works are. Even so, he chatters on with a great many works about faith and good works. And so what Luther is saying is faith, when we come to faith, it changes who we are. It dramatically changes. And so Luther says, faith is a powerful transformation in your life. right? If you think about this, the sight that you have when you learn something new that changes your life, right? The first time you met your wife, it changed your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, like you fell in love with her, you live with her, like you married her, you live with her, you have children. Your life changes because you saw your wife, right? It has an effect in your life. What Luther is saying, when we come to know God, it doesn't change us a little bit. It changes us entirely. It changes our heart because with faith comes the Holy Spirit, and it transforms who we are. So faith is not okay, I'll just accept that God died for my sin and I'm going to go back on my own life. No, it's a life-changing, eye-opening to see that what Christ has done for me. So what's really important here is that grace and faith, Luther talks first about grace, then about faith. Right? Grace is the gift of God that he declares us in his favor, that he justifies us, makes us righteous before him, and that grace comes with faith. Right, so that when we believe, this life of faith is a different type of life, which cannot but do good works. Let me go on with what Luther said. Faith is a living, unshakable confidence in God's grace. It is so certain that someone would die 1,000 times for it. The kind of trust in and knowledge of God's grace makes a person joyful, confident, and happy with regard to God and all his creatures. This is what the Holy Spirit does by faith. Through faith, a person will do good to everyone without coercion, willingly and happily. He will serve everyone, suffer everything for the love and praise of God, who has shown him such grace. It is impossible to separate works from faith as burning and shining from fire. What Luther is saying is faith is so closely connected that when a person comes to faith, he sees the grace of God and it controls his heart and life. Like and think about this. If you never knew that God existed, you just lived your life, you was thinking about, you got 80 years on earth, how are you going to do it, how are you going to plan, you just say what you want to say, do what you want to do to make the best life you can do for yourself. Yeah. One day the light goes on and you realize God is right next to you. It's going to change your life. Yeah. But not only that, you realize that God has sent his son to die for you, right? So as that reality settles in and you begin to see that God walks with you, you know him, you see him, Luther said it changes you. But not only that, it changes your heart, right? Before you love the things of this world, but faith causes a change in your heart that now you love the things of God. So, and that's where he comes in with the illustration that good works and faith are so connected with each other like burning and shining from fire, right? Yeah. You can't have a real flame without burning or a real flame without it shining, right? That's part of it. And Luther is saying, when Paul speaks about faith, it is the kind of faith that always produces good works because that's in the nature of saving faith.
Yeah, that's exactly what James says in his book, and usually people put Paul against James in this issue, so very interesting. Okay, but Luther recognizes that many people don't have this true faith. So what should a listener do if he or she does not have this true faith?
Yeah, let me give you the answer of Luther himself. And Luther is an evangelist at heart, right? We see him as the great reformer, but he really... He was constantly bringing the gospel to wherever he went because that changed his life. And so Luther says, ask God to work faith in you. Otherwise, you will remain eternally without faith no matter what you try to do or fabricate. And what I see here in Luther, I mean, he's writing a preface to Romans, assumingly to people who know the book of Romans, who have studied it, students of the book of Romans. Probably he's having pastors in mind that are going to have to explain the book of Romans for the rest of their ministry, right? And he's saying to them, you students or you pastors or becoming pastors, if you don't have this living faith in your heart, you need to ask God for it, right? And why does he say ask God? Well, he believes in the grace of God, that God is the one who gives gifts. And he says faith is a gift. So if we ask God and say, Lord, give me this real faith, open my eyes that I might see you, God will give it. And then Luther places the warning, Otherwise, you eternally remain without faith, no matter what you try to do or fabricate. Luther is saying there's two ways. If you don't have faith, but you want to be a Christian, right? Which is interesting, but that's the experience of our lives. If you want to be a Christian, you can do two things. You can try to imitate real faith, if you don't have it yet, or you can ask God for it. Okay. Right? So if you have real faith, obviously you have received it from God. But if you don't have real faith, you say, I don't have this life-changing faith in me. Luther is saying most people will just talk about faith and try to make their Christian life look like they have faith. But that's not right, because then you live in by works. What you need to do is you need to ask God for his grace, and he will give it to you.
So thank you, Paul, and thank you for watching us. So next time we will take a look at flesh, justice, and spirit, right?
Very
That's
good.
it.
Thank you so much.